And it took us also many years to have Joey to come to DLD. I think it's the third or fourth year we have been asking.
It's actually here.
And
then I need a sound.
Joey's going to talk about Creative Commons. Could I have more sound?
Yeah.
It's going to talk about Creative Commons. It's the title. Another key question of
one second while I sort out our technology.
about collaborative model. Hello, John.
Hey.
You're set?
And let's see if this shows up.
Fine.
Can you check if it's up there for me?
So welcome on stage, Joe Ito, to his speech.
Thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So today I'm here waiting for John Brockman to get his camera set up. Okay. So I want to talk about the sharing economy. First of all, I'm the CEO of Creative Commons, among other things that I do. Creative Commons is a non-profit organization. We have connections in 80 countries and jurisdictions and 50 jurisdictions. And it started out very much as a kind of political movement of a bunch of law school professors in the United States with the idea that copyright had gotten too extreme and we needed to develop tools to make it easier to share. But just as many things, it has turned from a political movement into something that's a little bit more practical, a little bit more technical. So my background is I'm an entrepreneur and I'm a technology person. And we're sort of in the process of converting Creative Commons to something that you wear on your T-shirt to show your political inspiration to something that looks a lot more like a technical standard. But let me describe a little bit, if this works. This is not working, so I'll use this. So I'm a technology person, so I think of things in stacks. And this is the stack that enables many of the things that we do today. This is a stack that is what I would call the internet stack. So before we had Ethernet and TCP/IP and the web, we had these big, huge chunks of computers and networks that were vertically integrated but didn't connect. So you couldn't physically connect computers together. You could, even if you could physically connect computers together, you would have to hire a consulting firm and a software company to, let's say you wanted to connect your publishing system with a billing system. It would take millions of dollars and years to do. And even though once we had the internet, we had computers connected together, it took several years before we had the web, which actually made it easy for users to connect the pages together and connect the content. And I remember when I first saw the web, and I was talking to all the technology people and the university people, they said, well, we don't need the web. We could log into each other's computers, read each other's pages, papers, and go to the links. And we can already do everything. We already have servers where we have files. And they didn't understand the value of lowering the cost of making content and lowering the cost of linking and bringing amateurs into the process of making content. But if you think about, for instance, Google, right? So Google, if you look at the first Google site, I think it's like google.stanford.edu or something like that. They launched it in Stanford. The cost of the computer that they put together to build Google, it's built on Linux, built on a standard PC. It uses all open source, and it used the internet. If you tried to build Google before we had the internet, first of all, it would be the telephone company, because they were the only ones that were allowed to actually innovate. So it happened in a big R&D lab. It would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars of research. And then it would have cost a lot of money to have bilateral agreements with everybody. And then the server would have probably cost millions and millions of dollars. So it would have cost probably $100 million to test Google, right? And the thing about Google, it has only cost a couple $1,000s and almost no money to actually connect it to the internet. And Google succeeded, but many ventures fail. And so one of the things that's happened because of this stack is that the cost of failure has gotten very, very low. right? So if you look at open source, if you look at Linux, when Linux was launched that same day, if you look at the email from, or the Usenet post from Linus Torvalds, he says, I'm going to start this project. It may or may not be successful. If you want to help, please help. There are thousands of projects that day that started. The cost of Linux having failed would have been nearly zero. But the thing is, over 99% of open source projects fail to even get a single download. But the thing is that by allowing the cost of innovation to be so low, you can try many, many things. And just like all the people tried to say, oh, well, the web isn't going to be interesting. We don't really need to do that. Well, the cost of trying the web was nothing. Therefore, having done it, you can look back and say, oh, that was neat. eBay. I bet you if somebody had given you a business plan for eBay 15 years ago, you would have said, well, I don't see why this would make money. I wouldn't fund it. But if it's a little bit of money, Piero Media writes a script and puts it together and it works. Wikipedia. Anybody can edit the page. We're going to make an encyclopedia. Do you think anybody would have funded that? These kinds of projects don't happen in research labs with large companies because the cost of failure is too high. So one of the things that I will assert is what each of these layers are is it's an open standard, not controlled by intellectual property, not controlled by any particular company. Anyone can participate. So before, you had to have a license to connect a device to the network. Then afterwards, you had to license the software to connect computers together. And then after that, the content management systems before the web were all proprietary. By making these open standards, what you've done is allowed anyone to participate without asking permission. You've lowered the cost of the whole thing, so Google's can happen at thousands of dollars. And you've basically decreased the friction of doing anything and the decrease of cost of innovation and dramatically increasing the productivity of the web by forcing competition. So like the earlier panel has a lot of relevance to this because there are some losers in this. A lot of the people who used to have proprietary networks could charge a lot more and get more earnings, even though they were less efficient because of the monopolies that they had. But these open layers force a kind of competition because anyone can participate without asking permission. But the net, I think we've realized that having looked back at the internet, that we're glad that it happened. And if you remember when the internet was trying to come out, in the United States it came out. In Europe, everybody fought against the internet. All the telephone companies didn't like the internet. In Japan, we had legal professors writing papers about how the internet was illegal because you're connecting all these things and you don't have agreements with each other. But having done the internet, we realize now that it would have been stupid to not do the internet. And so my argument is that there's another layer coming next, which is the copyright layer, which currently has a lot of friction, a lot of cost, and we are trying to do many things that fail because we don't have interoperability at the copyright layer in the same way that we have interoperability at the content layer, the network layer, and the physical layer. And to talk for a second about copyright, if you look at the history of copyright was created to prevent exploitation, commercial exploitation of authors and publishers. So basically, copyright was there to protect a publisher from somebody else coming and republishing the book and making money on your work, right? And so if you look at the original wording of copyright law, very, very early copyright law didn't use the word copies. They used words more that sounded like commercial exploitation. And actually, some people think it was a drafting error that the word copy got in there. But anyway, it wasn't really about copies. It was about commercial exploitation and the protection of monopolies for certain periods of time to allow people to recoup their investments, to allow people to innovate. What happened was at some point it started to link to the act of copying. For a while that was okay because that was the main form of exploitations that companies did with each other. But when the internet came out, suddenly it wasn't just companies making copies. Every time you browse a web page, every time you try to give somebody a book, all these things that used to not involve making copies suddenly triggers copy. So before the average user, before the internet, the average reader of a book rarely had anything to do with copyright law. There was very little that he could do to trigger copyright law. Even if he sold the book, gave the book, slept on the book, read the book, this is not copyright law. Now, if you try to read a book on your Kindle, you're triggering copyright law. When you give a book to somebody, you're triggering copyright law. So suddenly, every user has to deal with copyright, and it's suddenly the range of copyright restriction has gotten huge, which at the end of the day, what happens is makes life very complicated and creates a lot of friction. Because now, every time you want to do something, you have to involve lawyers. Just like you had to involve software companies and designers and computer companies to make big websites before we had the web. Now you have to involve lawyers every time you want to share a photo, every time you want to make a new company that does music. You have to hire an army of lawyers to figure out whether it's legal or not. And if you're Berta and you're negotiating with Time Warner, and you're doing a multi-million-dollar deal, flying to Cannes and drinking champagne and spending $100,000 on legal fees, may be okay if you're going to make $10 million on the deal. But if it's a $5 transaction between two teachers, hiring a lawyer and looking at contracts just doesn't make sense. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to sort of standardize that to lower the friction. And so what we're saying is that in copyright, there are sort of two camps. There are the Hollywood people who are saying, ask permission, all rights reserved, right? It doesn't matter because asking permission, the cost of asking permission for us makes sense because we're business. Then there are what we call the abolitionists. These are the hackers, the people who say, we don't want copyright at all. We want it to all go away. We're going to hack you, and everything information wants to be free, anti-copyright. But we believe that there's a whole spectrum of people in between who are kind of in between. They're like, I don't mind you doing this without asking permission, but for this, we want you to ask permission, and here's how I'd like to structure it, but I don't want you to ask me, and I don't want to have to hire a lawyer every time this kind of transaction happens. So that's kind of what Creative Commons is trying to do. I'm going to give you a couple of examples that are not Creative Commons examples, but examples of what I call the sharing economy. One isn't even really internet, but this is driven by the change in the cost of the production tools for music. So that it used to be that to create a track, you had to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to rent a studio and do music. But now you can do music on your computer. So suddenly the cost of making music has gone down, and it's created a huge scene in Brazil. One of them is called Tecnobrega. And there's some sound coming out. So this is what happens in Brazil. People go to parties and go crazy, right? And they're willing to spend a lot of money to go to these parties. And the parties are, as you can see, really exciting. And what they have is they have these crazy contraptions where they have all the DJs doing remix, going crazy. And this is where the customer feels they're getting the value. And they're willing to pay a lot of money to participate in these parties. And there are a lot of sponsors for these things. And this is where the value is, right? The value is not here. This is where the CDs are. The CDs are peddled on the street for nearly nothing. And none of the record companies make any money, right? So what the musicians there have done is they said, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and make our little recording studio, make our music, distribute it for free. We're going to give it to the street vendors because we're not going to make any money anyway. The street vendors are the ones that make the music popular. So they replace kind of the radio. Then the concert halls book them and say, okay, we'd love you to come because you're so popular on the street. And then the sound companies come and say, okay, well, we'll sponsor the party because you're so popular. We'll give you free gear. We'll give you a lot of money. And then the public starts going to these parties and to the concert halls, and they start spending a lot of money. And what's very interesting is that it's gotten to be such a huge business. It's multiple millions of dollars a month. So you've got people who are now funders and financiers of this whole ecology, and none of the money is being made on MP3s, but the kids pay to go to the concerts. Once they're in the concerts, they buy the original DVDs and CDs because that's the merchandising. And so just by shifting the focus from, well, clearly the kids aren't spending any money here, but they're all spending their money here, the musicians have just shifted their focus, right? So this is not a legal hack or not a Creative Commons hack, but this is just saying, follow the behavior change of the kids and focus on where the wallet comes out instead of trying to implement these old models. So this is kind of one way of thinking. To use another slightly odd Japanese model, this is called Hatsune Miku. This is a very weird phenomenon. This is called desktop music. And so what this is what you do is you type in the lyrics and you type in the notes, and it sings the girl's voice. And it turns out the Japanese otaku, the hardest part to fill in the band is the girl's voice, right? So it worked very well, and so they focused on the Japanese otaku. But what they did was they decided to create this cute anime character and say, go ahead and use a character for anything you want for non-commercial use, right? And so what happened was they got hundreds of thousands of people making this character into illustrations for free use, right? So it started promoting this thing by giving away the right to the character, where if you were Disney, you go to elementary schools and make them scrub the Mickey Mouse off of the side of their pool. Here they're saying, okay, please use our character. And then it became, popular CDs. This is number 2 on the Japanese CD chart. And then they reserved the commercial rights. So they have these characters now, these figurines that sell for hundreds of dollars, which provides a new revenue stream for them. They've sold about 45 times as many of the software package, which is not cheap. It's about $150. So these guys are making millions of dollars on this product. And the longevity of the product keeps going because people keep making derivatives. And so people are making software, 3D animation software, that helps you create these characters. And what happens is when the character gets animated and put together with the music, you get video. And so there's a site called Nico Nico Doga, which is around 1/6 of the internet traffic of Japan. It's like the YouTube of Japan. And what people are doing is they're taking the cartoons, images that they're making, with the music, and they upload them. But the added feature is you see all the text running along the top. These are comments that people are typing in that get displayed over the music. So this is people cheering and doing all these weird things. And so this is another adaptation of the Creative Commons idea, which is allowing people to create derivative works by sort of graffitiing the music. And people reload and reload and reload. And so this is like a huge subculture. But this has influenced a whole different range of things. So the Communist Party of Japan is the dullest and the sort of most stodgy, shrinking party of Japan for the longest time. And they make very good points, but on TV, they're kind of boring, and nobody watched them. So what they did was they uploaded the speech of their leader to Nico Nico Doga and allowed these people to graffiti it. So this is a long 50-minute speech, but suddenly they had millions of young kids talking about this because this guy is actually talking about something important, which is he's talking about the abuse of temporary young workers by large companies. And so suddenly, all these kids who never watch TV, play with Nico Nico Doga because they're there for all the media content, are suddenly watching this Communist Party head, and there's a huge surge of young kids joining the Communist Party. And this is because he's kind of had nothing to lose, and they just put it up and say, do whatever you want with it. But and it's not necessarily good that all the young kids are joining the Communist Party because it's not a good outcome necessarily. But it's very interesting to see it's like the previous example with Tecnobrega, by figuring out where are the kids, so I think technology changes behavior, especially in the younger generation, and you look at the behavior and try to figure out where the attention is, and you move there, rather than trying to force your consumers to fit your technical architecture or your business model. And it's kind of an obvious thing, but it's not something that many people are doing. So anyway, so I think that the internet has made it very easy to produce content because computers are getting cheaper, and very easy to distribute content. And I think people like to share. I think that the average person likes to share, and as you look at the younger people, they like to express themselves. So when I was growing up, I bought CDs, and then I started playing video games, and then we went to karaoke, and then we started writing blogs and texting. So if you look at that, it's consumption, interaction, right? Participation, expression, right? And what's happened is that the media used to only allow consumption. So we created this whole business model of mass production, distribution, and consumption of content. But most people will pay you more to express themselves, sometimes using the content of mainstream media, but they will pay more for expressing themselves than they will for consumption because expression is much more rewarding because you get a connection. And I think people still haven't realized that. I mean, I have blog companies. People pay, the people, if you look at the business model of a blog, it's the people who are writing who are paying. It's like, of course, because they're the ones that care about what they're saying more than the people who are reading. And so I think that that's the kind of business model that's changing. And so people, assuming people like to share, and there's an economy of sharing, what's happened is because we've been so afraid of the repercussions of letting copyright go, is that copyright has become the main friction that prevents sharing from happening well. Because we don't want, I am not anti-copyright, I'm not anti-mainstream media, so I do think it's a risk and a danger if allowing sharing starts to diminish the protections of mainstream media. That's not what I want to do. I want to figure out a way to allow users to share, but also protect the rights of the people who have the rights, and everywhere in between, everything should be legal, everything should be protected. So we basically say you have, everybody that wants to share has a couple of things they like to express usually. I want attribution, I don't want commercial use, I do want commercial use. So we provide licenses for free to express these basic things. And so once you decide what you want your content to do, say, I don't want derivative works and I don't want commercial use, we will generate a license for you in legalese that will works in 50 different jurisdictions and 50 different languages, and it's all standardized. But the really important part of this is not just the copyright licenses. The W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, they're the guys that make the new HTML, They're the ones, the custodians of the HTML process. We've worked together with them to create what we call RDFA, which will be the next version of HTML, but is already being deployed by Yahoo and Google and everybody else. And when you look at it, it just looks like HTML. But what it allows is every object now on the internet will have a license and copyright information and the author and the owner attached to the object, and if it's a derivative work, where it's a derivative work of. And what will happen is once we start building it into all the tools, into your camera phone, into Adobe Acrobat, into Google, you don't need digital rights management and watermarks. As long as it's built into the HTML, most of the people who matter will follow it, because all your software will say, OK, you downloaded some music, and it says, I want to use this in my YouTube video. It'll say, you can't do this because the copyright says you can't. OK, search for music that I can use. Oh, here's the music that you can use. OK, create the video. And then it automatically keeps the author attached to it. And when you upload it to YouTube, it says, OK, all the music contained in this video was created under a Creative Commons license, blah, blah, blah. And here are the links to the authors. And as long as the copyright information gets attached to all the content on the internet, only the people who want to be shared will be shared, and all the people who want to be protected will be protected. So we're trying to create this where in a way that you don't need a lawyer every time you try to transact. So that's the idea. And so Google and Yahoo and Microsoft and everybody is now building it into the infrastructure. And so I think in a year or two, it'll be built into most of the tools, so you don't really have to think about it. You'd set in your preferences, OK, I'm the kind of guy who doesn't care about, I'm happy to be on CNN as long as I get attribution. So I'll choose allow commercial use. But I always want attribution. But I don't want any derivatives because I'm a documentary producer and I don't want people to change the story. And you set that, and then everything you produce will be used that way, and people will respect that, hopefully. So a couple of examples. Starrec was a Finnish film produced for 15,000 euros by some students. And it was released under Creative Commons license, over 8 million downloads. So it became the most popular film ever from Finland. But then after everybody started watching it, a huge fan base got created. And then they got a DVD deal, and they got a TV deal, and now they're getting a theatrical release. So giving it away created fans, which created demand, right? And I think anybody who's doing net marketing knows that it's harder now to get demand than it is to get distribution once you have demand, right? It used to be the other way around. It used to be that the cost of distribution and the cost of cutting these distribution deals and flying to Cannes and all that, that was where the problem was. Once you had the core pieces, the demand part was easy. So I call this, it used to be a delivery problem. The media business was a delivery problem, and all the delivery guys were in charge. But now it's a discovery problem, because you can get every single music, every single piece of music, every single movie, you can get immediately. So as an artist, it's how do I get to my fans, right? How do I get chosen? And as a viewer, it's how do I discover what I'm trying to look for? Because it used to be, how do I deliver to my customer? And how do I, so the discovery problem is the main thing. And Nine Inch Nails did a really interesting experiment last year. They released their Ghost album under a Creative Commons license, so you can go to any file sharing network and download it for free. And they created a website where they created these merchandises. So it's a limited edition box set, a photo book, all this stuff. So in 1 week, they did $1.6 million in sales. And the really interesting thing is you can download all of this MP3s for free, but they were also the #1 purchased MP3 file on Amazon.com. So think about that. People can go and get it for free, but it's more people bought it than any other song last year on Amazon. It was #1 on the Billboard electronic music charts. So it broke all the charts. They made tons of money, but they gave the music away for free, because giving it away for free created more demand. And it's difficult. I mean, we have to do a lot more research before we have empirical data, because it could be just that the music was great. But as we do more and more research, we're finding that there's a pretty simple formula, which is if you have potential demand that exceeds the amount of cannibalization that you get from giving it away, you give it away. You have to make a guess. But if you have already maximized your demand and you don't need any more, then giving it away may not help you. And so it's just a matter of trying to balance the cannibalization effect versus the demand increase. But if you think about the global reach, for instance, I talk with a lot of Japanese anime distributors. the fact that fansub otaku create German subtitles on their anime creates a demand that they would never have been able to market into if they had prohibited that kind of derivative work as strongly as Hollywood does. So they actually rely on these pirates to create demand in niche markets that they would never send people into. All of this is being done practically illegally, under the covers, somewhat secretly, by the distribution and sales guys inside of big media companies. But what Creative Commons is trying to do is trying to make this more legal and trying to make this more explicit so that the quality of the people involved increases. Typically, the rights collections agencies have been negative about us. I mean, I know ASCAP is having a weekend or a luncheon where they're talking about to all their executives that Creative Commons is evil and we're anti-copyright and spreading fear. But mainly, I think it's because we do introduce some complexity into the music publishing businesses that can be a pain. But in certain countries, we're having a lot of success. So in the Netherlands and in Denmark, we now are working together with the rights collections agencies so that an artist can say, I don't mind for non-commercial use if fans download my music for free, but if they're a customer of the rights collection agencies, I want them to pay. And so we have licenses that allow a hybrid that allows you to make money and still give away certain rights to try to create more promotion. Obama was a big supporter of Creative Commons. All of his photos during his campaign are licensed under a Creative Commons license, so you don't have to ask permission to use it on a blog. Duh, right? Change.gov was the transition site. All of this was licensed under a Creative Commons license so that you can use it. I was talking to one of my friends who's at NHK. They're doing a documentary on Obama. They were really happy that they could use a photo of him without asking permission. It saved them a lot of time, right? And I'm sure Obama was happy that he had a picture that he had taken show up on NHK instead of one that they had sort of figured out from their archives. The good thing is, I don't know if everybody saw, but the inauguration at 12 o'clock exactly, they updated the website for whitehouse.gov, and they put Creative Commons on the White House page, which is nice for us. And I will go ahead and there are a lot of publishers using Creative Commons. So I'll end by just saying we're trying to work very closely with industry. So a lot of people still characterize Creative Commons as anti-business, anti-copyright, and we're trying to do a lot of projects that help hybrids. So there are many people who say, for certain uses, we want Creative Commons if you're non-commercial, but if you're for commercial, we want our own license. So we've now created a way of using that metadata I was showing you earlier to bundle both licenses together. So one company called Pump Audio, they take care of commercial rights. They actually make millions of dollars for their artists in placement of the music in things like commercials and television and motion pictures. So what this allows is by using the Creative Commons non-commercial license, it says that if you're a MySpace user, you can go ahead and embed the music without asking permission. But if you are a commercial user, you click on the license and it says, here's where you go to license the music. Right? So what they're doing is they're using the non-commercial use of bloggers of MySpace to get out to their fans, but they're also using the Creative Commons license to create a link back to the commercial site. And if you think about it, you know, I saw Getty Images downstairs, but Getty Images, you go to the Getty Images site, and then you search for your photos. Well, wouldn't it be neat if it all showed up on the blogs and get in Google image search for non-commercial use, and if you really wanted to use it, you clicked on a commercial link and you would go and you'd pay for it and you'd buy it. So the idea of creating hybrids where you have commercial use and non-commercial use together, this is, I think, the next big thing that we're trying to do. And I think Al Jazeera just also started releasing their footage under a Creative Commons license to try to use blogs to promote their brand. So we also are urging media companies to try to experiment a little bit more with giving a little bit of the rights away in exchange for traffic, which is really the most expensive thing right now to buy on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you very much.